So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're based. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar about who really owns it using company ownership data for investigations. My name is Agustina. I'm Community Engagement Manager at Open Ownership, working closely with beneficial ownership data users on using and investigating with beneficial ownership data. Quick overview of what we will be doing today. We'll have a quick introduction to what is open ownership for those that don't know us, why we think beneficial ownership transparency is important. I'll briefly introduce the Opening Extractives program, which is through which we've been engaging with these wonderful organizations and speakers that you will be hearing from of. And then we'll run directly into the presentations from organizations from Argentina, Mongolia, Nigeria, and Zambia. And we really want to make the best out of this opportunity. So we'll have around 40 minutes for discussions and for Q&As from the audience. So quickly, Open Ownership is a global think tank that promotes beneficial ownership transparency worldwide. And we do so through providing technical assistance to countries in their BO implementation journey. We do so through research and guidance, producing policy briefings and investigation on how this can add value in different policy areas. And we develop technology tools to help with implementation and with the use of beneficial ownership data. So we have a data standard where we promote data to be well-structured and interoperable in the world. And we hold a public beneficial ownership register with public beneficial ownership data that countries have published worldwide. Why we think beneficial ownership transparency is important? Mainly because we want to know who are the natural persons, the physical persons at the end of an ownership chain. We want to know who ultimately owns or control a company. And this ownership can have different policy drivers. I won't go into each of them, but different countries or people can have different entry points that might be interested in why they might be interested in investigating or using beneficial ownership data, and depending on the government agency or depending on the area that you're investigating as a journalist or as a civil society organization, you might be focusing in each of these ones. Today, we will focus in the extractive industries because each of the projects that will be presented today focused on an angle in touching base on extractive industries. But we have different policy briefings that touch on different of these policy drivers and lots of organizations and people working on different angles. So kind of when we talk about beneficial ownership transparency, we can see that there are simple ownership structures. We say that the ownership is held directly in this case because there's a person that owns a company, even if the person is from a different nationality in which the company is being registered. This is quite straightforward, it's quite simple, and we can say that the person exercises its beneficial ownership either through the ownership of shares or by controlling the company through different means. That can be through being a board member, it could be through holding veto rights or voting rights, appointing directors, or many other means of control. But then we can have quite complex ownership structures. We can see that in some cases, the person at the end of the ownership chain exercises its ownership through indirect ownership. We have other companies, trusts, or contracts that that exercise that ownership on behalf of the beneficial owner, who is the natural person, as I said before, at the end of the ownership chain. So different type of legal arrangements, such as trusts, contracts, subsidiaries, or other means, legal vehicles, can obscure interests. And in the presentations today, you'll hear how these organizations have been investigating particular companies and how all of these layers of ownership obscure and help to hide the people at the end of the ownership chain, making it difficult to really see who's behind, who's benefiting from a company ownership. Luckily, there are lots of countries of the world that have committed to beneficial ownership transparency, and this has been done through domestic laws, but also to adhering to international standards such as the EITI standard and others. Half of these countries have actually implemented beneficial ownership registers, and that is what we are aiming to do through open ownership and through the Opening Extractives program to help to narrow that gap and try to have more and more countries that have committed to actually have central beneficial ownership registers. The Opening Extractives program, as I said, is one of the ways in which we're trying to do this. And it's a program that we are jointly implementing with the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the EITI, where we are aiming to transform the availability and use of beneficial ownership data in the extractive sector in particular. We are doing so in different regions of the world. And today we'll hear from some of these countries, but it's a global program focused in the global south, helping countries and organizations and governments to drive policy changes. How we're doing so? We're doing so through technical and political work, supporting beneficial ownership implementation and the compliance with the 2.5 requirements of the EITI standard through dedicated technical assistance to governments. We're doing so through capacity building and support to data users through different workshops and training and overall support, mentorship to data users, and by communicating and providing evidence and insights to shape and influence the global landscape. In particular, this webinar is focused in that second work stream that I shared around capacity building and support to beneficial ownership data users. We have trained more than 100 people in different countries, particularly focused on investigative journalists and CSOs advocates. And we've focused these trainings in not only increasing their knowledge on beneficial ownership as a concept, but also on different investigative techniques, on data sources and data availability worldwide, and how to understand and use this information for investigations. So as part of that work, we saw that there was a big demand from data users to get funding and support into actually implementing dedicated projects that looked into beneficial ownership. So last year, we opened a global call for proposals where people, organizations, journalists, or individual people from the 13 countries in which the program focused them could submit a proposal. We received 45 proposals worldwide from, as I said, the 13 countries that where the program was focusing them. And we shortlisted and selected 4 projects. It was quite an ambitious and a challenging process. We received very, very good proposals. Unfortunately, resources are limited, so we needed to select 4 of them. And the 4 of them are from different countries in which the program is working. So those are the ones that you will be hearing from today. One of the projects from Argentina was delivered by Fundeps and Red Ruido, which focused in investigating the beneficial ownership and management of the lithium extractive companies in Argentina. In Nigeria, Policy Alert delivered their 3rd version of the Wetting Wigay campaign, particularly investigating the crude oil swap deals and the beneficial owners of the companies involved, together with some communications and advocacy activities. In Mongolia, the Mongolian Data Club improved their data analysis tool and looked into the procurement and expenditures of state-owned enterprises and trained journalists to produce visualizations and articles using their platform. And in Zambia, the Center for Trade Policy and Development, together with Tax Justice Africa, developed an online platform compiling data of key mining companies, including not only information about beneficial ownership, but also estimated government revenues lost, together as well with some communications and advocacy work. So I will stop here because the really, really interesting part of this webinar is to hear from them about how they researched, how they investigated, where they obtained the data from, what they found, and what this means for each of their countries. So we're having Delgelma Boldelbatar from the Mongolian Data Club. We have Mukuka Chilakila, who's a researcher from the Center from TTPD, the Center for Trade Policy and Development from Zambia. We'll have Mpong Gabriel from Policy Alert Nigeria. And we'll have Eduardo Litvinov from Red Rido Argentina, representing the Argentinian project. So I will directly stop sharing so we can see our faces, and I'll directly hand over to Delgerma from the Mongolian Data Club to start with her presentation and hear of the work that they've done in Mongolia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Augustina, and hello, everyone. Greetings from Mongolia. And my name is Delgerma. You can call me Degi. And I am the very active promoter of open data use for improved governance in Mongolia. I've been working in the mining sector to promote transparency and good governance, I think, over a decade. And I do some research to test this, how this open data use ecosystem is working in Mongolia and what's working and what's not. And the Mongolian Data Club is very group of community comprised from data scientists, investigative journalists, and researchers and so on. And we all together piloted this innovative approach to promote the investigative journalism in Mongolia, data-driven journalism in Mongolia for improved voice. So I'll start my presentation. Can you please share my presentation, please? So, and last couple of, I think in 6 months, we piloted this project in support of this Opening Extractives program. And everybody here, we do have, next slide, yeah. In Mongolia, as I give you some context, in Mongolia is very dependent on mining sector. So we are dependent on very mining sector, and it contributes to our economy, very wide range. Sorry, zoom please. And the foreign direct investment, for example, 70% of foreign direct investment is coming from mining sector, and we export coal and copper, and it also contributes to the our economic budget, national budget, one third. And but on the other hand, I'm sorry, and on the other hand, but we do have some governance issues. For example, we ranked at 166 and as per the corruption index. So in general, that's why in Mongolia, a lot of government of Mongolia and companies promote the transparency initiatives, for example, EITI, Open Governance Partnership, and we actively promote these disclosure practices in over like 20 years, but there was a lot of information. And next slide. But on the other hand, there was some scandal or not hidden like questions, or there is a lot of difficult questions to answer to ordinary citizens. For example, recently we saw a very big scandal on mining sector about the state-owned companies, and they are saying that one of the political parties saying that it's actually a lot of a big discrepancy was in between the exported coal and imported coal sold and exported coal, and there was the big scandal on big amount of money was like disappeared, and it turned to the big demonstration by the citizens, and we demanded many citizens demanded a lot of questions from the government to answer. And next slide. We practices this kind of some cases, and the government and that state-owned enterprise reaction was they started to allocate the coal transportation company to give some licenses very equally to the 180 companies. And they started to disclose additional information, not only tax payment, not only beneficial owners, but they started to disclose transportation companies' information to their websites. In other words, a lot of additional information has been in contracts or some deals, and some license information is disclosed by the government and by the company on their own. It doesn't like demanded by the standard, but because of this social scandal and some recent cases, they improved the transparency. Next slide. But the journalists couldn't actually, was lacked some lack of capacity to use these available data effectively and to demand more accountability. And we designed the project that how these innovative tools or beneficial ownership data can be helpful for the journalists to demand the accountability to investigate some hidden network. So how we help with this, our hypothesis was, what if we build the capacity on investigative journalism, and what if we build the journalists' data analysis skills? And we developed user-friendly, there was a lot of government information and PDF files. It was like not open data, but using some EITI technology and some advanced tools, Power BI, for example, knowledge graph, we developed this user-friendly data analytics environment for the journalists. And then we helped them to link some additional data. For example, they gave us some coal transportation companies data, which had some registration information. It had some numbers and company names and so on. And then we linked those data set into the legal owners and beneficial owners data, which is also publicly available by the government. And finally, we also added value to improve their storytelling by creating visualizations, more simplifying their stories as very understandable. So this is what happened in the last couple of months, and the result was, next slide, please. One back, yeah. The result was impressive, and I would like to share that once, and the journalists, one of the group journalists investigated these coal transportation companies, and then they tried to answer whether this government organization and state-owned mining companies allocate this license equally as they say. But using this beneficial ownership data, they found that and only 5 beneficial owners owned 30% of total coal. but then and some of the beneficial owners were linked with the political exposed persons or very big offshore companies registered in offshore area. So this was also one of the key insight, and that journalists, followed this case, and then it article is published by they created this visualization and wrote about the stories, and they had some investigations and so on. And this article reached a lot of millions of people, and it created a lot of noise, and it received a lot of many phone calls from the drivers or ordinary drivers to help them to analyze more data. So in conclusion, next slide, please. We saw that by creating a more user-friendly and simplified data analytical environment would add value for journalists to follow the money or follow the network or uncover some hidden network which they can't understand. So I hope that this data tools and innovative approach would add value to combat with corruption or some demand more accountability in Mongolia. So I'll stop here and would be happy to answer if there is any questions. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Delgi, for your presentation and sticking on the time as well. It was very enlightful, and I'm really impressed by the work that you've done, and this brings me to think about the importance of intermediary organizations in trying to digest the information that is spread in different government portals in ways in which we don't fully understand it, and try to pull it together and engage with the end users, with journalists reproducing digestible information and making it available for the public, and how it creates noise, as you were saying. I'll follow up on this because I have a few questions which are very interesting, but that will be done at the end once all of the speakers have spoken. If anyone from the audience have immediate questions or reflections, please use the Q&A function at the bottom so we can start collecting questions for the speakers. So now I'll hand over to Edgardo from Red Ruido to share the Argentinian project.
Hola, buenos días, muchas gracias. Soy Edgardo Litvinov de la Red Ruido. Somos una red nacional de periodistas, especialistas en datos abiertos y distintas organizaciones sociales que investigamos temas relacionados con transparencia, acceso a la información y corrupción. Y en alianza con la Fundación Fundets, investigamos en este caso, esto que voy a mostrar. Bueno, antes que nada, también un poco de contexto. Como ustedes saben, el litio es uno de los minerales que más interés está despertando en el mundo, porque es uno de los componentes principales en la producción de baterías para todos distintos dispositivos que usamos todos los días, celulares, tablets, computadoras, también para vehículos. Y si bien es un mineral que está presente en muchas partes del mundo, solamente en unos pocos países se presenta en una concentración tal que permite su producción. En este caso, Argentina es uno de esos países, es uno de los 4 productores mundiales de los grandes productos derivados del litio, especialmente cloruro de litio. Integra junto con Chile y Bolivia el triángulo del litio, que tiene casi los 2/3 de los recursos mundiales, y solamente Argentina tiene el 20% de las reservas mundiales de litio. En este caso, dentro del programa Opening Extractive, investigamos eh, dos de esos proyectos que extraen litio en Argentina. ¿Por qué? Porque actualmente hay 38 proyectos en Argentina. Esa parte del mapa que ven es una parte del norte de Argentina que limita con Chile y con Bolivia. Hay 38 proyectos en distintas etapas, pero solamente dos de ellos, que son los dos triángulos azules que ven, uno en la provincia de Jujuy, otro en la provincia de Catamarca, donde actualmente se produce ya el litio, están en la etapa de producción del litio. Solamente dos proyectos. Y acá empezamos a ver parte de lo que investigamos, que son los beneficiarios finales de las dos empresas principales que producen litio en Argentina. Lo que ustedes ven en el gráfico de la izquierda es la composición accionaria de Sales de Jujuy, uno de esos dos proyectos, que en realidad es una compañía, una sociedad anónima compuesta por tres compañías. La principal es Alkem de Australia, la segunda es Toyota de Japón, y la tercera es una sociedad del estado de Jujuy, de la provincia de Jujuy, una empresa oficial que tiene el 8,5% de las acciones. En el caso del otro proyecto, que es el proyecto que está en Catamarca, el proyecto Fénix, la empresa que lo explota es la empresa Livent de Estados Unidos, que posee el 100% de las acciones. Y lo que ustedes están viendo en estos gráficos son es la primera capa de la composición accionaria de estas empresas. Un dato que no mencioné en el slide anterior es que los 38 proyectos, más estos dos proyectos que ya producen y exportan litio, pertenecen a empresas extranjeras. Eh, Todos son, salvo este pequeño detalle de la empresa Gemse en Sales de Jujuy, que es una empresa oficial de la provincia de Jujuy. ¿Por qué hablamos de provincias? Porque según la Constitución Nacional en Argentina, los minerales son propiedad de la provincia en donde están asentados, no del Estado Nacional, y por lo tanto son las provincias, en este caso Jujuy y Catamarca, las que tienen los contratos de concesión y explotación del mineral, en este caso el litio, de cualquier mineral, pero en este caso es el litio. ¿Y qué pasa cuando ya entramos en la segunda, en la primera y en la segunda capa de los beneficiarios finales y de los accionistas de estas empresas? ¿Qué fue lo primero que detectamos? Eh, que las dos empresas, cada una de estas empresas tiene sus principales accionistas son fondos de inversión internacionales. En el caso de la empresa Livent es BlackRock y The Vanguard Group, que son dos de los fondos de inversión más grandes del mundo. En el caso de la empresa Alkem, la australiana Alkem, que es la que posee la mayoría del proyecto Fénix en Catamarca, es el HSBC Group y JP Morgan Group. Pero lo curioso que empezamos a ver cuando vemos la mayoría de los principales accionistas de estos fondos es que son propietarios cruzados entre ellos. Tanto BlackRock como Vanguard son accionistas de HSBC y JP Morgan y viceversa. HSBC y JP Morgan son accionistas de Vanguard y de BlackRock. em, en distintos porcentajes. Por lo tanto, la primera conclusión que encontramos es que son cuatro fondos de inversión de los más grandes del mundo los principales accionistas de las dos empresas que extraen litio en Catamarca. Ustedes ven en el gráfico y en las listas es la misma información. En el gráfico se puede ver de una forma eh, y en el listado, en el texto, se puede ver de otra con los nombres coloreados. Y otro detalle más que encontramos es que estos cuatro fondos de inversión, entre otros, también están entre los principales acreedores de la deuda externa argentina. Esto es un ejemplo que pueden ver de uno de los reportes de los reportes finales de una de las empresas, que es la australiana Alkem, eh, porque lo primero que nos preguntamos es hasta dónde podemos llegar en las capas de beneficiarios finales de estas empresas. Y realmente encontramos mucha información, pero muy dispersa. Uno de las principales fuentes de información son los reportes de las mismas empresas. En este caso, estamos viendo el ICANN, y también una de las principales conclusiones y de las primeras conclusiones fue que a los niveles que pudimos acceder de beneficiarios en el sentido de composición accionaria y dividendos que cobran de esas empresas, fue muy limitado, porque si bien encontramos algunos de estos nombres de los beneficiarios finales, en conjunto no suman en ningún caso más del 1% de la composición accionaria de esas empresas. Es decir, que ni en estos reportes finales, ni en la información pública a la que se puede acceder, pudimos encontrar cómo se reparten los dividendos o quiénes son realmente los beneficiarios de ese 99% de composición accionaria compuesto por fondos de inversión. Las mejores fuentes de información en este caso fueron los reportes finales de las mismas empresas, ya que fue muy difícil conseguir información local, eh, especialmente en las provincias que detentan el control y los contratos de explotación de los minerales. Fue muy difícil acceder a la información, si bien a nivel nacional el gobierno nacional concentra mucha de esa información, a nivel local se hace muy difícil la transparencia. Hay una especie de desconexión entre el gobierno nacional y los gobiernos locales en este aspecto. Y la verificación de información es muy difícil en estos casos porque al estar la información tan dispersa, hay que recurrir a muchísimas fuentes de información. Entonces, lo que no se encuentra, por ejemplo, en estos reportes finales, lo encontramos, perdón. Ah,
Sorry, there is
eh,
someone unmuted.
sí,
Please mute your microphone so there is no
yes.
background noise. Continúa,
Bueno,
Eduardo, perdón.
continúo.
Adelante.
Acá se puede ver a grandes rasgos el cumplimiento de las normas de transparencia por parte de los estados subnacionales, que son las provincias, en este caso Jujuy y Catamarca. En algún caso se puede acceder de manera parcial a alguna de la información relacionada con regalías, contratos, personas políticamente expuestas o composición accionaria. En algunos casos en parte y en algunos casos es directamente imposible. Nosotros para realizar esta investigación realizamos más o menos una veintena de pedidos de acceso a la información, tanto a las empresas como a los gobiernos locales, y las respuestas fueron nulas, no hubo respuesta en el 99% de los casos de los pedidos de acceso a la información en los gobiernos locales.
Edgardo,
Lo que
nos queda
pueden ver,
un minuto.
perfecto, y con esto cierro. Lo único en estas dos últimas slides que recopilan las fuentes de información para la investigación, sirven para ver la dispersión que existe para encontrar los datos, la falta de registros unificados y la dificultad que tienen periodistas, personas y asociaciones para acceder a este tipo de información. Eh, ya lo dije, los reportes anuales fueron los principales, las distintas bolsas de valores, sitios especializados como Market Screener, Bloomberg, Money CNN, de donde sacamos información que no existe oficialmente en otros sitios. Y un solo ejemplo para terminar, para que tengan una idea de los problemas de transparencia y de acceso a la información. Por ejemplo, no existe en Argentina un registro de quiénes son los tenedores de bonos, o sea, acreedores de la deuda externa argentina. Para acceder a esa información tuvimos que depender de la información que voluntariamente publican las empresas sobre su stock de bonos. Así que la conclusión tiene que ver con la dificultad, la transparencia, la falta de transparencia en los gobiernos locales y la dificultad para acceder a toda la información relacionada con beneficiarios finales, en este caso en la producción y extracción de litio. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Edgardo. Muy interesante el ejemplo y sobre todo la dificultad de investigar Sorry. I confused and started talking in Spanish, but thank you very much, Edgardo, for your presentation. And this really shows the importance of looking and investigating into public listed companies and the difficulties in trying to get actually natural persons at the end of ownership chains of these big companies. And there's a question about this actually in the Q&A that we'll touch on later. But then I'll directly hand over to M. Fawn Gabriel from Policy Alert to hear from the Nigerian example.
All right. Okay, good afternoon and good day to everyone connecting, across the world. It's a good thing to be part of this conversation this afternoon. Like the previous speakers have rightly mentioned or have presented, I will also be presenting on our investigation, the Waiting We Gain investigation, using beneficial ownership data to investigate the Nigeria crude swap deals. So generally, when we talk about waiting we gain, is a Nigerian parlance for the word what is in for us. And in this investigation, we were concerned with first and foremost to investigate the linkages between the natural owners of the companies in the swap deals, alongside with the volumes of crude that has been traded for refined products. We were also concerned about building capacity of CSOs as well as investigative journalists to use this data to further the conversation and in fact do more investigation on this, as these are new reforms in Nigeria. And lastly, to also see how we could influence policy, raise awareness. In fact, our concern has been that there has been a lot of disconnections between companies, corporate agencies of governments who are more concerned in using this data. So we wanted to see that there's this handshake. All right, so when we talk about, please, the next slide. When we talk about the crude swap or Nigeria's oil for product swap, what we are referring to here is more like a complex transaction, more like a barter, a trade by barter as we know it. And in this transaction, it is between the National Oil Company of Nigeria alongside commodity trading companies. The reason for all of this is because the 4 refineries that the National Oil Company owns, they are operating below capacity. They can't meet national demand. So the National Oil Company had to think of a creative way to see that fuel supply, refined products meets national demand. So they had to come up with different ways to see that the market is saturated. So we have 3 types of swaps here. The first is what we call the offshore processing agreements. Now, this agreement speaks to the fact that the national oil company, that is the NNPC, give crude oil to refineries outside Nigeria to refine and then import and bring back, the refined fuel. Then we also have the refined product exchange agreements, RAPIA, which is actually the real swap here. So the national oil company engages commodity trading companies and then give them what we call equity crude, the crude that is owned by the federation. And this crude is supposed to go to the refineries. But since the refineries are not working, they're now giving to these commodity trading companies so that these commodity trading companies will in turn provide refined products to the country. Now, both the offshore processing agreement and the refined product exchange agreements ran from 2010 to 2015. Now, from 2016 up to the present is the direct sale, direct purchase. Because of the inadequacies, the corruption, the lack of transparencies, and the many issues that bedevil the first two types of crude, the crude swaps, the NNPC had to come up with the direct sale, direct purchase. So this is more like selling the crude oil to these commodity trading companies, and the commodity trading companies in turn use the crude that they've sold, that they've purchased, and get refined product and sell it back to Nigeria. That is what this arrangement is all about. Now, but our concern in the investigation, please, the next slide. Our concern in the investigation, because of the paucity of data that we access in the Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, we have to rely on the data available from 2010 to the present. So we have, for example, the first commodity trading company that the NNPC engaged was Trafigura. Trafigura is a Netherlands incorporated company. So it's one of this commodity trading company, a known one for that matter. So between 2010 to 2014, Trafigura traded 96.7 million barrels of crude oil at a value of $10.5 billion US. Now the total product value, what the refined product that they imported back to the country, was at the value of 10.4. That is already showing more like it's not actually meeting the actual value that was traded. Now, coupled with other costs like transportation, demurrages, and all of that, that is being borne by the NNPC. We have $165.2 million there. So between this period, we recorded a net loss of $228.1 million US. That is the loss that the Federation, recorded. Now, the other trading company that the NNPC engaged during this war is Duke Oil Trading Services. Now, Duke Oil Trading Services is one of the subsidiaries of the NNPC. One of the subsidiaries of the NNPC. And its main function here was to trade this crude and then produce, bring back refined products. But what Duke Oil did was that Duke Oil refused to engage in this trade directly. It now engaged other commodity trading companies like Ateo, like Ontario, and Televeras. And what we observed here is that between 2011 to 2014, that Duke Oil engaged these three companies. For Ateo, for example, a total of 1.2 billion barrels of crude oil was traded at $375 billion. In fact, to cut the long story short, we have a record of $9.6 billion loss. Ontario, $43.4 million was traded. The long story of that is that there was a record of $296.5 million loss. Televeras traded for the $7.8 million crude oil. Cut long story short, a record of $457.5 million was lost. Now, what it shows there is that there was no value for money. The equity crude of the Federation did not actually meet the original demand of the country because there were other issues around tax evasion, issues around the quality of product that is being imported into the country. Please, the next slide. So we were concerned to know who are the people behind these companies, because that's the kernel of this investigation. Who are the companies? Who are the natural owners behind these companies? So we look at Duke Oil, like I rightly mentioned. Duke Oil is a subsidiary of the NNPC. NNPC is the state-owned oil company of Nigeria. So what we observe is that Duke Oil, yes, a subsidiary of the NNPC, but in its letter of incorporation, its function was not to trade oil. Its function was actually to provide administrative services to Duke Oil Company Incorporated Panama. The Duke Oil Company Incorporated Panama was actually supposed to do the trading here, but we saw Duke Oil Services that was made, that had a job description or a company description of providing administrative services doing the trade here. So we now look at who are the owners of the NNPC. Like I said, it's owned by the Federation, but again, the Petroleum Industry Act of Nigeria in 2021, placed the ownership of the NNPC on two major states, the federal government-owned ministry, the Ministry of Petroleum Resources and the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. So these are the two companies with 50% stake on the NNPC for Ministry of Petroleum, 50% stake for Ministry of Finance. Now,
sorry,
owners,
we have 1 more minute.
Okay, we equally needed to look at the heads of these ministries, which is in Nigeria, the Minister of Petroleum is the president, while the Minister of Finance is Sam Sudin. Please, the next slide as I attempt to round up. The next slide. So for Trafigura, what we equally concern ourselves with is that Trafigura incorporated in the Netherlands, but again, Trafigura, which is a long-term company established in the 1960s, now needed to submit its parentship to Trafigura Group Pte, now in Singapore. Now we look at the beneficial owners of this company. We realize that Frankfurt Foundation is incorporated far away Panama, and it's more like recently in 2019. This is more like an offshore haven where some of the funds are being stashed. Then also the ownership of this company, we have 110 employee shareholders of this company, and all of them, based on the European Union BO details, none of them supposed to. The details for beneficial ownership disclosure is 25%, but all of these shareholders here owns less than 5%. But again, they also draw economic benefit from the company, as well as the voting rights, and the actual control of the company is based on is domiciled with the board of directors. Please, the next slide. Okay, so what were the key findings we observed? Now, within this period, we observed that the former boss of the pipeline products marketing company, a subsidiary of the NNPC, the MD, established several companies, offshore companies, and also opened several bank accounts, up to about 50, where nairas and dollars were stashed. And this was discovered by one of the anti-corruption agencies in Nigeria. Also within this period, we also observed that the NNPC GM, the former NNPC GM, Yakubu Andrew, stashed about $9.8 million in his house. Most of this money were gotten within this period of this crude swap. And this money did not pass, the financial institution. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, another agency, anti-corruption agency of the country, needed to take up this case to the court. But unfortunately, they could not actually establish how this man got this money. They were just saying that the money didn't pass through the financial institution. There were no actual facts to nail this man. So the court just acquitted the man. Also, we realized in this investigation that the former MD of Duke Oil in the UK made attempt to contest the 2023 election that just ended in Kano State. So people were asking the question, how can a civil servant, someone working just for a state-owned company, have this kind of money to contest an election in the ruling party of the country, far away Kano? So these were serious red flags that we equally observed during this period of investigation.
I'm sorry, we have to, yeah, please wrap up.
Yes. The last slide. I'm done. Okay, so the early outcomes that we got in this investigation is that, first, like I said, we are looking for that handshake. All of this while state agencies have been working, on their own. There's not been this collaboration among them. So we were able to see through this investigation, we were able to have these agencies agreeing to work together. And the NFIU, the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, sets up a policy roundtable with other anti-corruption agencies, including the Corporate Affairs Commission that warehouses the BO data. This way they could be able to verify the data that the companies are giving to the CAC, as well as use this data to further investigate. NNPC is equally one of the supporting companies of the EITI, and by that, they're supposed to be proactively, transparent. But what we realized, immediately they were incorporated, they stopped being transparent. But in the last policy dialogue we had with all of these agencies of government, NNPC commits themselves to greater transparency, moving forward. So these are the early outcomes we have been able to achieve within this period of investigation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anfum, very much for your presentation. And I'm sorry for cutting you off a bit. We want to make sure that all speakers have the time to share. This was very, very interesting. I have lots of questions, but let's jump directly into our Zambian presenter, and then we'll come back for questions to you. As a reminder to all our participants, you have the chat box and the Q&A function. So please leave any questions you might have to Mphone, to Edgardo, or to Delgi in the Q&A section, and we'll go to them shortly. So over to you, Mukuka from CTPD Zambia, our last speaker of this session.
Thank you very much, Agustina, and thank you to the previous speakers for their elaborate presentations. So my name is Mukuka Chlalika, and I'll give a presentation on the Zambian case on this topic. Okay, I think, Agustina, just share the presentation from that side.
Okay. You can start in the meantime.
Okay, yeah. So, as I mentioned, I'm from the Center for Trade Policy and Development, a Zambian civil society organization. So, in delivering this project, CTPD partnered with the Tax Justice Network Africa, a regional civil society organization. We can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Yeah, we changed the slides. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm still seeing the cover.
We are in the, we can see them
okay,
correctly, Isabel, and the briefing.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So this is just a brief highlight of my presentation. We can go to, okay, all right. So as I already mentioned, the Center for Trade Policy and Development is a Zambian civil society organization. Yeah, so our work centers around conducting research, advocacy, and capacity building on various issues, including the extractive sector, which brings us to this presentation here. So mining is a critical sector in Zambia. It contributes about 70% to the country's export revenue. We can go back, please. The next slide. Okay, so I can continue. So in recognizing the importance of the extractive sector, it's critical that the nation gets the expected benefits from the sector. So part of that is enhancing transparency. Transparency in licensing, transparency in terms of the tax revenue that is coming out of the sector, as well as transparency in terms of who are the actual owners of the mining operations in Zambia. So with this background, CTPD, with support from the Opening Extractives program, undertook a project to enhance beneficial ownership in the mining sector. So the focus of our project was on expanding access to beneficial ownership information. So as Agustina had mentioned earlier, a lot of countries, including Zambia, have made commitments towards beneficial ownership transparency. So Zambia has done this through the EITI process, as well as through amendments to the Companies Act. However, currently, if you want to access that information, it will be on a case-by-case basis, and it's not openly accessible. So we ventured into this space to open up access. So our focus was to conduct an analysis on selected companies in the extractive sector, determine the beneficial owners of the companies, also look at their compliance to taxes, as well as statutory obligations such as filing annual returns. Yeah. So in terms of the focus, our focus was on selected companies that were highlighted in the Auditor's General Report in 2021 to not have filed mineral royalty taxes despite having exported minerals. So mineral royalty tax is a tax you pay for extracting minerals. So the fact that you have extracted minerals, it means that you have to pay the tax. So in terms of data sources, we use data from PACRA, the Auditor General. So PACRA is the Patents and Companies Registration Agency, which is the agency responsible for registering companies, as well as maintaining a register of beneficial owners. So we also used data on taxes from the Zambia Revenue Authority, as well as other online data sources. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Yes, it is updated. Please go ahead.
Okay. I think there is a lag.
Yes, we're in the challenges slide, Mokuka.
Okay. Okay, let me speak from my slides from this side, if that is fine. So I'll briefly talk about the challenges that we faced in undertaking this project. So when we got the data from PACRA, what we found was that none of the companies we were looking at had actually filed beneficial ownership information. Another thing we discovered was that there were several corporate shareholders owning these companies with very complex ownership chains and very little information known about some of these companies. There was also an issue of some missing company data. For instance, you find that the shareholding doesn't add up. Yeah. So when we encountered these challenges, we had to find a way forward. So in charting the way forward, we had to expand the parameters for beneficial ownership. So because we didn't have this data readily available, we had to go back to the definition of the beneficial owner according to the Zambian Companies Act. So we have to look at issues of having effective control, as well as owning a minimum of 5% shares. That's taken as having substantial interest in a company. So we also supplemented the data from PACRA with data from online sources, including company reports, as well as other web sources such as the UK's company registration platform. Okay, so the major output of our project was a publicly accessible platform of beneficial ownership of selected companies. So we looked at 23 companies. So let me just share the link. Okay, so that's the link to our portal. Then I know you can access the portal at another time, but for now, I'll just briefly talk about an example so that you get a bit of context. So the example I'm going to highlight is for the link I've just shared. It's for a company called Sebozink. So Sebozink is a company that's based in Zambia, Central Province. Yeah, so it's a copper and cobalt processing facility. So this company has been in existence since the 2000s. It's changed hands from Metorex, Glencore, and finally it's now owned by Jubilee Metals. Now, if you look at how Jubilee Metals, okay, so Jubilee Metals is a UK registered company. Jubilee also owns Sebozink through a complex ownership chain. So it owns Jubilee Metals through a company called Bremo Holdings Mauritius, which is also owned by another subsidiary of Jubilee, which is Bremo Resources. Yeah. So this company, if you look at it, as I've already mentioned, it has not filed beneficial ownership information. So in trying to ascertain who the beneficial owners are, we had to expand our search. We looked at who are the board of directors of Jubilee Metals. So we relied on the company's own reports as well as other online sources. I'm sure when you take time to look at the link I've shared, you'll see all this information. Then in terms of taxes, so in 2021, Sebozink had exported copper and cobalt worth $28.6 million. However, they did not remit $1.4 million in terms of mineral royalty taxes. Next slide, please. So from this brief example, as well as the other cases you will find on our platform, you can see that the absence of beneficial ownership information leads to loss in government revenue. Why? Because without knowing who is behind the company, the natural person behind the company, you won't have specific individuals to hold accountable. You'll be mentioning a corporate entity instead of looking at the individuals behind it. Another impact is that without beneficial ownership information, it will be difficult for you to have a transparent mining licensing regime. Why? Because an individual can own as many licenses as possible, but with readily accessible beneficial information, you'll be able to try to say, okay, individual A owns licenses for mining operations A, B, C, D. Yeah. So what are the opportunities from what we found? I think we're looking at one, tightening and improving the law on beneficial information, beneficial ownership compliance. Yeah, so we have to look at the law. Is it strict enough for non-compliancy? For instance, the law says a company that does not file beneficial ownership information commits an offense. It doesn't go further to state what the offense is or what the penalty is for not filing beneficial ownership information. Then in terms of improving the law, we have to look at what is it that companies have to do for them to file beneficial ownership information. Is it simple enough? Can it be understood? So if it's complex, we have to simplify it so that we can improve compliance. Another opportunity is in stimulating engagements between private sector operators, which are the companies, as well as the state, particularly the Patents and Companies Registration Agency. So for this to work, we have to pull in the same direction. So we have to engage with these companies, build capacity, and understand exactly what the challenge is in terms of filing this information. There is also an opportunity in terms of
Mukuka, we have 30 more
collaboration with
seconds, please.
okay, yeah, collaboration between non-state actors as well as state actors in creating public awareness and building capacity on this issue. So that's the end of my presentation. On the final slide is contact information for me, as well as the organization I represent, the Center for Trade Policy and Development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mukuka. I'm sorry for interrupting you. You were just finishing, but actually the clock sounds when you finished, so that's fantastic. So thank you to our speakers for presenting and preparing for this webinar. All the examples and the work that you've done is super, super interesting. We have around 15 minutes. We might be running a bit over if there's room for more questions, but we have quite a few questions in the Q&A function. So I'll dive directly into them, starting with Argentina. The question is about identifying beneficial owners of public listed companies. So kind of Argentina's example highlights the challenges even in identifying the BOs, where there may be, for instance, thousands of individual shareholders. So Edgardo, if you want to reflect on this a bit, and I think I'd also make the second question to you if you can, it's because you're a journalist, and the second question touches on what are the tools that journalists can use to deal with the apathy from the public. The Mongolia case showed how uprising the public could play a role in how the information is provided. So your project also has quite a few graphics and interactive sources to make the information digestible to the public.
Bueno, me gustaría mostrar lo de la primera pregunta, si se puede, con un ejemplo para que se entienda mejor. Lo muestro, ¿se está viendo?
Sí.
Es, para que vean que es un mix de problemas que tienen que ver con este acceso a la información. Vamos a poner de ejemplo esta empresa Alkem, que es la empresa australiana que explota el litio en la provincia de Jujuy, en Argentina. Eh, Tenemos una primera capa de acceso que sí es accesible, que tiene que ver con los principales accionistas. Entonces nosotros podemos acceder, por supuesto, la mayoría son fuentes internacionales, ¿no? O reportes de las empresas, en este caso australiana, o sitios especializados. En el caso de la información local, es muy difícil, casi imposible, acceder incluso a la primera capa de beneficiarios. Entonces, una vez que tenemos esta primera capa de beneficiarios, ¿qué podemos hacer? Estos son los principales. Podemos ir accediendo al primero, al segundo, al tercero, pero porque en este caso tenemos muy pocos nombres propios. Los pocos nombres propios de Alkem tienen que ver con su junta directiva y con su equipo ejecutivo, y la información se podría sintetizar, lo que se puede encontrar en cuanto a los dividendos, por ejemplo, que reciben. Como se puede ver, solamente 2 personas de todo este equipo directivo están registradas en el reporte final de la empresa Alkem, en este caso el reporte 2022. Solamente 2 personas. Cada una de esas personas tiene aproximadamente el 0,05% de acciones. Es decir, que la información pública a la que se puede acceder, a la que cualquiera puede acceder, nos está mostrando solamente los dividendos por acciones al 0,1% de los beneficiarios finales. Del resto, en este caso de la Junta Directiva y del equipo ejecutivo, no podemos conocer cuáles son los dividendos, y para conocer un poco más de los beneficiarios finales de todos los accionistas de Alkem, tendríamos que entrar a analizar cada uno de los reportes finales de la empresa HSBC, JP Morgan, Citicorp, Toyota. y seguir abriendo capas, porque vamos a abrir la primera capa de HSBC y lo muestro también para que se entienda mejor. Abrimos la capa de HSBC Group y de nuevo tenemos otra capa de fondos de inversión que son los accionistas de HSBC Group. Podemos seguir abriendo capas. En este caso, el reporte final de HSBC Group no, no publica el reparto de utilidades, o sea que ni siquiera en este caso podemos conocer esa información mínima de reparto de dividendos. Y se requiere muchísimo tiempo para seguir abriendo capas, capas, capas y seguir buscando beneficiarios finales en cada una de estas capas, pero el problema es el mismo que todos los expositores contaron en relación a la dificultad para acceder a los beneficiarios finales de los fondos de inversión. Eh, Eso creo que sintetiza de alguna manera la respuesta a la pregunta. Y por otro lado, también tiene que ver con lo que dijeron los otros expositores, una gran opacidad en los gobiernos locales y nacionales sobre los registros de beneficiarios finales y sobre todo sobre la integración de esa legislación. Existe mucha legislación sobre beneficiarios finales en Argentina, pero muy dispersa, no se logra un registro unificado, es muy complejo, es muy compleja esa búsqueda. No sé si con eso es suficiente, Agustina.
Sí, perfecto. Thanks, Edgardo. And I'll make the same question I did to you, to Delgi as well. Either of you can jump in on that one about the digesting information and making it visually appealing to the public. What's your take on that, and how to bridge the gap between apathy from the public and making information digestible and understandable for all?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. And in my experience in the last 4 years, I've been also working with IFC to promote digital skills on data visualization and so on. And lessons learned was, if we provide some simple tools or teach some Flourish or Canva, there's a lot of tools, but the main problem for the journalists and ordinary citizens is to access to data. For example, government data is not open data. They just publish a lot of information in PDF, or they publish HTML, and it's not like enable more analysis to reuse currently available information. So I would suggest what we did is we are collecting this information by using IT technology, and we linked a lot of different data sets into one warehouse. And this data exploration tool or some Power BI, any kind of tool we can use, but main thing is the data should be open and should be linked with each other by one, like for example, ID, for example, procurement data, tax payment data, beneficial owners should be linked with each other by the company registration number, for example. It should be enabled to this. That's why this data standard is very important. In terms of digesting these lot of big data set, we tested to use the exploratory tool and to create more visualization by using these tools. But our main lessons learned is data scientist and investigative journalist has different talents. So we are just creating more teamwork, collaboration to work on the one article together to analyze data and to create more visualizations for storytelling. So I would say it's like different dots. Here is the data scientist and here's the journalist, but simultaneously data illustrators are also another creative talent to simplify this information to the general public. So I would suggest as much as possible to create more teamwork, connect the talents, and then it will enable more more outputs and results, we hope.
Thank you, Delgi. That's super helpful. And I saw there was another question around replicating the process and the program you've done in Kenya. So there's quite a bit of interest in different regions of the world. Sorry, to conduct similar approach of what you've done and as per the impact that you had. There's another question around whether there will be a new call for proposals in the 13 countries in which the program is working. I don't know who you are, but I will leave my email at the end of the webinar so you can reach out to me. We don't have a current schedule or timeline in which we will open a new call for proposals, but we are conducting regular trainings, workshops, and engagements with EITI users, sharing tools and resources, and seeing what support we can better provide. So if you have a particular project in mind or our engagement idea, please do reach out to us and we can think together how to collaborate. And there's another question from Oliver, which I don't think I fully understand. So Oliver, if you're on the call, do you want to unmute yourself and make your question live? Oliver Chilefu, I see you're here, but are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, sorry. I was struggling to find the unmuting button. Initially, my question is that in the experiences during the investigations that was being conducted in different countries and then presenting different scenarios that we've been given, did any of our the organizations that have presented had any experience with a company that has, for example, multi-level shareholders, including financiers, such as those ones that receives financing from international corporations such as the World Bank? Did they have any experience? I know CTPD mentioned 23 companies. I don't know which of the, whether one of the companies have got that kind of multi-layer ownership, because financiers can be considered as beneficial owners as well, and they have got some levels of influence. So if they did, what are some of the challenges that was observed or found in order to find out who the real owner is? And how does this affect in ensuring there's transparency and accountability, including issues of, we've had cases of resource transfer or wherever the financier is, that's where much of the resources are going. How does it affect if there was such kind of an experience? If there isn't, I think it could be nice also to find out on how best we can deal with such in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Does any of our speakers want to jump in and respond? Or if you haven't seen this as part of your investigation, reflecting on what Oliver was saying?
Mm-hmm. I think I can share some practice in the Mongolia case. For example, one of the group of our trained journalists tried to investigate or to understand this ownership level. So in the mining sector, supplier companies or mining license holders, sometimes foreign invested companies, and they also owned by the international multinational companies, and that company is also registered in offshore, for example, Virgin Island or something offshore like area. And for that team, they just stuck it to investigate the beneficial owners for those companies. So that was the level of investigation. And open ownership or some extractives or EITI also shares some good resources where to find these international company or registered companies owners. So I would suggest to look through that sources, and if they also have some sources they can use, but otherwise it should be also very international network to work together to follow this case. So in general, in Mongolia, sometimes they stuck, or sometimes if they are registered in Mongolia, they can do some investigation, but it's more like global, wider or multinational case. Sometimes they lack of resources.
Thank you, Delgi. We are 1 minute close to the end of our webinar, so we can stay 5 more minutes if people, I know that many of you might need to drop off, so if you need to be aware that this webinar will be live on YouTube, but those that can't stay will just take 5 minutes of your time to wrap up. Mukuka, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Oliver wanted to find out. So quite right, in our analysis, we did find companies with long ownership chains, companies which are owned by other corporate entities, including multinationals. However, our analysis didn't go as far as looking at the financials. We were focused on the equity holders as well as the board of directors. Yeah. So in terms of how we handled that, we tried as much as possible to go as far back as possible in the ownership chain. So we'll try and identify who is associated with the parent company of those corporate entities in establishing who the beneficial owners are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukuka.
Just to add to what my fellow speakers have said. Okay, so for us, while doing this investigation, we leverage on several sources that open ownership has, furnished us with, but much more, we equally need to look at the corporate registry of these companies in their own countries, because most of them were not just operating, not registered in Nigeria. So we need to look at what was available in the corporate registry of their own home countries. We equally needed to look at the annual reports of these companies, the digital footprints that they have left over the years. That way we could, unravel who are the actual owners of these companies, behind the scene. And not only that, we need to equally leverage on some of our networks, friends who have been, who are working outside the country to, enable us to have insights in the home countries of, these companies. That way, at least it has, furnished our work too.
Thank you very much. So I'm afraid so let's take the final question around the risks, and I'll give 30 seconds for each of our speakers to talk about this as a part of reflection and wrapping up the webinar. And I respond Malaki's question typing, and the speakers can do so as well. So let's take Enea's question around what risks you've encountered or anticipating while researching, and that may inspire and might be good for others. So Edgardo, I'll start with you. 30 seconds.
Bueno, me parece que lo más importante para inspirar iniciativas similares es decir, que pese a las dificultades, es mucho lo que se puede lograr de todas maneras, y que la única forma de acceder a más información es que haya más iniciativas similares. Y me parece fundamental, por ejemplo, si nosotros en Argentina vamos a investigar una empresa, una compañía australiana, hacer un trabajo conjunto con periodistas, investigadores y organizaciones australianas. Me parece que en el futuro eso va a ser un desafío porque en este sistema encadenado, en este entramado de accionistas, cada vez se va a volver más difícil investigar desde un solo país. Parece que va a haber que empezar a pensar en iniciativas más abiertas, más en equipo y más transnacionales para este tipo de información.
Thank you, Edgardo. Delki?
And thank you for the last question, Agustino. And in my view, in terms of risk, we think that the data ethics is very important to use these beneficial owners' data more ethically. For example, there should be private data protection. If you would like to use this beneficial or legal owners' data, you should also protect the personal information for public audiences. So you also have to train the journalists' skill on some legal background of using these beneficial owners' data and have to protect yourself when you have some cases and so on. So there is lots of like misunderstanding between the legal framework, but the actual case, like if journalists use some information, there's also some risks for the court, for example. So we are really trying to see how Mongolian data ecosystem can be improved through different capacity building, innovative tools, and also this kind of clarity in legal terms.
Thank you, Delgi. Mokuka?
Okay, thank you, Agustina. So in terms of risks that we face, it has to do with access to data as well as our ability to make our platform public. So Zambia is just entering into this space where data has to be shared openly. So there are still rules around data protection. So to start with, for us to access the data that we use in our analysis, we have to enter into an understanding with the registration agency. Yeah. So I think that that shows that there's still work that needs to be done in terms of opening up access to ownership data. Thank you.
Thank you, Mokuka. Mfon, last but not least.
Yes, okay. For us, the challenge we faced were that, yes, Nigeria has a corporate registry, but most of the companies in the extractive sector, they have not complied with the regulatory demands. So most of them have not filed their annual returns so that they could equally update their BO data. That's one. Then also because of our investigations, deal with companies outside Nigeria, especially European countries and countries registered in British Virgin Islands and the Panama. These companies in their home countries, 25% is the disclosure threshold for BO data. And so that way, most of these companies, that are registered in this, these safe havens, they are not disclosing their data to regulators because most of their the shareholders own less than 25% as required. So that poses a kind of a challenge for us. But like I've rightly said, we need to find another way out to actually know who are the men behind these companies by looking at their digital footprints, their annual reports, what's the issues, the court cases that they have with other companies. That way we could actually know who are the actual persons driving these companies. And then for the state-owned companies too, because it's state-owned, so it's difficult to actually pin who are the owners. But again, we have equally looked at the board of directors and then the top management company that takes the biggest decision in this company. That way we know who are the actual guys that controls this company and the benefits that they've derived from running this company. That is why we could actually say, okay, the MD of this company did this within this period of time. you know, the GMD of the national oil company did this. So that way we're not just concerned because it's a state-owned oil company, and then we just rest at that. So we need to know the board members and then also the MDs and the senior management. That way we unravel those guys who takes the big decision on behalf of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton, very much. So I will give us to a close. I want to really thank all of our speakers for the great work that you've done in these past months investigating. I want to thank your teams as well, and particularly Julie from Open Ownership team, who has been following and working quite close with all of you in providing mentoring and guidance and support throughout the projects. I hope this has been inspiring for the participants here. I am sharing a slide with my email and open ownership details in case you want to engage with us, if you need support for something. We really want to keep engaging and in touch with people that are interested in investigating in beneficial ownership. And I also want to thank our colleagues from the EITI who we implement the program with, who have also provided lots of insights and support throughout the program. So I'm sorry for overrunning a few minutes. I hope you have a very nice rest of your day and to keep in touch.